Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. Welcome to Lifeline. Let's play some games. Quarantine chair volleyball. 1-0. This is quarantine foursquare. Yeah. You know, this quarantine got me feeling like I'm playing one giant game of zombie tag. I can't find anybody out here. Quarantine one-on-one basketball. I'm gonna make a video of quarantine volleyball and quarantine nukem, but look at all these bees. They're not social distancing. That's so dupe. Hey guys, that was some of our favorite games to play during quarantine. Now it's time for announcements. I just have one quick announcement for you. Everything's canceled. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. It was a pleasure for me to film. It's usually about how well I do in games anyways, but I miss you guys. I hope you're doing well. Without further ado, check out our video on our message. Hey guys, welcome to our first video in our Apologetics series. You know, unfortunately we are in this position where we're not able to be with you, but we wanted to continue on in this series to give you guys something to listen to, something to watch, and hopefully continue to grow in your understanding of some of life's hardest questions. You know, we chose this series so that we could give you guys opportunities to have some of your questions answered, some of the questions that you guys struggle with for yourselves, but also so that you could become equipped in how to answer the questions when your friends or your family or people that you know ask you these questions. So the first one that we're going to talk about is, what would it look like in our world if God never existed at all? So not what does it look like for us to not believe in God, but still acknowledge in some sense or fashion that he existed at some capacity. But what would it look like if there was no form of God ever, right? What would our world look like? How would we be created? So on and so forth. And, you know, a lot of those questions are answered simply by, you know, evolution or different things like that. But what we're going to focus on with this alternate reality, so to speak, of God never existing at all, is what would our personal lives look like? So we're going to go through this. We're going to talk about, you know, 3 specific things that our lives have with God and what our lives could look like if we didn't have those things. And those things are meaning, value, and purpose. So when we go through this, we're going to refer to meaning as having to do with significance. Why would something matter? Value is going to have to do with good and evil, sort of the right and wrong. And purpose has to do with a goal. So it's our reason for something. The claim becomes that if there is no God in existence and he never existed, then meaning, value, and purpose are completely and entirely human illusions. What that means in our lives is that they are just in our head. And if atheism is true and there is no such thing as God ever existing, then all of those things, meaning, value, and purpose, are entirely 100% up to us. The problem with that, right off the bat, is that they become subjective. We cannot say that what is meaningful to one person is meaningful to another person. We can't say, you know, what's right and wrong for one person to do is the same as for another person to do. There's no moral compass. There's no, you know, there's nothing that transcends time and generation and money and all these things to keep us living a life according to everybody else having the same meaning, value, and purpose that we have. The opposite of that is objective. You know, objective is factual. It means that you can prove it. So when we think about it, it means something that would be the same across people, the same across, you know, generations, the same across cultures, so on and so forth. We could think about that as sort of, you know, the idea that murder is wrong, right? So we realize that taking the life of somebody else, you will be punished for. It is objectively wrong. It is morally wrong. It is wrong in the eyes of the law. And therefore, we can say that it's wrong across cultures, across generations, across all these different things. So The problem, though, really becomes with our individual lives, right? So when we think about this idea of God never existing, we realize that we are still ultimately doomed. We are set down in our lives and marked down for, eternal death. The reality is that everything biological is going to die. Based on our human resources, our human smarts, our human intelligence, and our human advantages, we have not conquered death. We have not found a way to live forever. There is no such thing as immortality, and therefore someday we are going to draw our last breath, and we are no longer going to be living here on this earth. Now, we must come to face with this reality when we consider the idea of living life without God. But it goes beyond that. Did you guys know that someday the universe is actually going to perish as well? Scientists tell us that the universe is expanding all the time. And what that means is galaxies are growing further and further apart. As this happens, space grows colder and colder and colder. Therefore, stars must use more energy and they will burn out faster. When that happens, all matter is going to be sucked into the dead stars that become black holes. There will be no light, which means there will be no life. It means there will be no heat. It means that nothing can be sustained. And there is nothing that we can do. There is nothing that humans can do. We have no power to move galaxies. And the reason we don't have power to move galaxies is because we did not create them. We cannot get stars to last longer because we did not place them there. We are subject to whatever happens, whatever will be, and there's nothing that we can do to change it unless there is a living God and he steps in. But what if we do die? Does our lives ever really make a difference? Does it matter to anybody else? I used to think as a kid, what would it look like for me to have kids and then them have kids and then them have kids and them have kids, so on and so forth, generation after generation after generation? Would they ever think of me? Would they ever even know my name? Would I, no matter my accomplishments or the records that I set at my school or, the grades that I got or the job that I had or how much money I had or car I drove or whatever, would they know? Would it matter? Would they care about it? And I think the answer is no, because after all those layers of generations, people are just focused on themselves and they don't really think about where they come from. And I think that's good. I also think it's a little bit sad sometimes. It doesn't matter because whatever bad decisions I make can be fixed by generation after generation. Whatever good decisions I make can be erased. Ultimately, our lives have no meaning or value or purpose if there's no such thing as God and there's no such thing as eternal life. The decisions that we make and the way that we live our lives have no real implication for ourselves or even generation after generation. Thus, my childhood fear really becomes true. And furthermore, if this is true, then mankind has no more significance than any bug that we kill regularly, mosquitoes or flies or ants or whatever. We are all just the same. Our contributions to science, literature, human knowledge, medicine, etc., they don't mean anything. It's a horrible realization that the modern man has to come to terms with when we think about our lives lived without God. Because if we came from nothing, then we will end in nothing. I know a common fear that people have is they feel like they're worthless. They think to themselves, what if I wasn't here anymore? Would that even matter to anybody? Probably not, because I'm so worthless. I think we fall into this thought process because we focus so much on it. We focus so much on the meaningless of our contributions. We focus so much on the meaningless of our lives that our earthly standard is set so high and we can never, ever attain it. We're led like horses down a street with blinders on towards the one goal that we're focusing on. When horses wear blinders, they would do it so that you can't see anything to the left and the right. They can't get distracted by anything. And in some thought process, that's a good idea, right? It's a good thing to be so hyper-focused on your goal, what gives you life, what gives you purpose, what gives you meaning. But the reality is those horses could have had no idea that there was something beautiful just to the left or just to the right of them. They could have had no idea that they were, in fact, walking into some situation that as they were focused on what was ahead of them, there was something terrible to the right or to the left of them. And similarly with our lives, if we're so hyper-focused on one goal, thinking that that is the only thing that's going to give us purpose, we are never going to give ourselves the chance to get lost in the beautiful views around us. So, let's think about these words again, but let's think about them this time with the idea that God does exist. So we talked about life without God had no meaning. So therefore, using our Russian friend's philosophy, life with God does have meaning. To try to create meaning in our lives, you must understand the idea of meaning based on what I give it versus what is undeniably true. A life lived without God is not a life that you can live sustainably. You cannot find your own happiness if it is based on your own merits. You cannot find that happiness and know that your life is meaningless. But ultimately, we can if we understand that happiness, joy, peace, patience, kindness comes from God. And we can have those things because of God and ultimately with God. The value of life is a big one. And I think right here, we're going to camp out on this idea of value of life for a little bit, because this is where a lot of people's arguments start to break down when they talk about there not being any existence for God, or they're not, talking about God being our creator or a sustainer or a redeemer. Atheistic humans are inconsistent because they struggle to affirm the values of love and fellowship. The view that there's no values in that is logically incompatible with saying that there is in fact love in the world or fellowship in the world. One famous atheist named Bertrand Russell, he was super, super inconsistent in this regard. He was known as a very outspoken atheist. He was also very, very outspoken social critic. He would denounce war, saying that it was pointless and that he didn't think that all those people should have to die for a war that he didn't necessarily believe in or that they didn't necessarily believe in. He was outspoken about restrictions on human life, etc. He even said in his later life that he could not live as though there was no ethical value, or if those ethical values were simply a matter of personal taste, and he found his own views to be incredibly inconsistent. He confessed in his later parts of his life, when asked about this, I have no solution. The point is that if there is no God, then objective right and wrong do not exist. God is the ultimate judge of this. He is the moral barometer by which we measure good and evil, and therefore, once you remove him, there is no judgment to be made on whether something is right or wrong, or good or evil. Most people say here, in this regard, that there is no one to hold me accountable when I do something bad, right? And I believe that I would do mostly bad things if that were the case. If there was nobody in the world to hold me accountable, I would probably do mostly bad things. And this is a very slippery slope, I think, because when we think of it this way, we can view God as only the restrictions. We can view God as only the one that holds us back, or only the one that sits there and says, do this, don't do this, this is right, this is wrong. And we miss out on the fact that God gives us freedom. We miss out on the fact that God created us in his image. We miss out on the fact that God is the giver of life and allows us to live it to the fullest. And sure, there's parameters by which we live, but ultimately those parameters are set in place for us to flourish as individuals, for us to become fully alive in what he's created us to be, and for us to figure out exactly how much he loves us. There is nothing greater on this earth than to be similar to that horse that's walking down to one specific thing, realizing what it is that you were created for, but also being able to see all the beautiful things surrounding you and realizing that your purpose was set forth before you by God, and everything else around you was also created by God. When we think about a life lived without God, and we think about how life has no value, I think perhaps the best picture of what this would look like in a practical sense is what the world would look like if World War II had never ended. We think about the death camps. We think about places like Auschwitz, and we see what happened there. So if you're not familiar, Auschwitz was a death camp occupied by Nazis that held Jewish men, women, and children. And we're not going to go into a lot of what happened there. But let's just suffice it to say that there were unspeakable actions that happened here. It's really, really hard to read. It's really, really hard to watch movies about. there were just so many things that happened, like people being separated from their families. Many people were killed innocently. Many were tortured to the point where death honestly came as a relief to them. And it's just completely and totally unspeakable because there was nobody there to tell them that what they were doing was wrong. They had no moral compass. They had no understanding and thought process of the value of human life outside of their own. They were completely and totally subjective in their thinking that their race and their lives were worth more than something else. A rabbi who survived Auschwitz said it was as if they existed in a world where the Ten Commandments had been reversed. I mean, that's just an absolute terrifying thought process. It's an absolute heart-wrenching thought process. And if God does not exist, and if judgment and morality and common graces amongst people and love and fellowship don't exist, then this is exactly what it's going to look like for the rest of our lives. Richard Dawkins is a famous new atheist, and he himself cannot reconcile the idea of true atheism, meaning a world without God, and the idea of life being valueless. He says that there is no evil and no good, nothing but pitiless indifference, and yet he vigorously condemns actions against homosexuals, the incan practice of human sacrifice, and he even goes so far as to offer his own 10 commandments for guiding moral behavior. Once again, another atheist who is outspoken and inconsistent with his own beliefs. So finally, let's take a look at this last word, which is purpose. You know, the way most people deny purpose in life, live happily ever after by either making up some personal account of purpose, which falls into the category of self-delusion and is therefore subjective, or they lie to themselves. There's no doubt that finding your purpose is extremely difficult, right? We understand that finding our purpose is something that we all think about. If you guys are seniors and you're heading into college, a lot of people will be asking you, what do you major in? And a lot of times we decide on our major by what we think our purpose in life is. We think that living out our purpose means living out a career path that will allow us to attain that purpose. But it's so much more. It doesn't matter what we do, it matters how we do it. It doesn't matter, because no one career path is more meaningful than any other. There's no more valuable than any other, no more full of purpose than any other. It just is completely and totally based on what God has created for us. Now, this doesn't mean that we can figure it out for ourselves. And we can understand that because the simple fact that when we don't feel that we have a purpose in our lives, or we don't feel like we know our purpose in our lives, it doesn't sit well with us. We struggle with that. We argue with ourselves. We argue with other people. We try to figure it out. And just the fact that it bothers so many people shows you that it is actually a real thing, that it is actually a universal truth that people struggle with. It is actually not subjective, but it is objective to people's lives. The dilemma that people face is simple. Their atheistic worldview is not enough to keep people happy throughout their lives. Their arguments break down. We cannot live a sustainably happy life without meaning and value and purpose. We cannot do it. It does not make sense. It is impossible. These three things are essential to us finding out who we are. It's essential to us finding out how we're supposed to act amongst other people. It's essential for us to figure out how to love other people. We cannot interact with other people in the way that we were created to, the way that we should, and the way that we would expect other people to interact with us without understanding that their lives have meaning, value, and purpose, and so do ours. And we cannot do it effectively if it's based on what we think it should be. We have to understand that there is a creator who is sovereign over all of this, who has placed it in our hearts to love one another, who has placed it in our hearts to love ourselves, and gives us an opportunity to wrestle with these things and figure it out so that we can have peace in the midst of all of these questions. We can see other people the way that God sees them, as them being worth something. We can see ourselves as being worth something. Everything breaks down in our lives the way we love ourselves and the way we love other people if we don't understand that God exists and gives us meaning and value and purpose. I don't believe that there is a set value to a life that is exceedingly more important than one another. I can tell you confidently that the value of a human life is worth so much more than we could ever offer by means of earning or saving up for ourselves. I don't think that I could be before you here today and tell you, I have 3 small children at home and a wife, and I think one of them is worth more than anything else. And it's hard because we have to learn how to love them individually, but also still realize that they're all worth the same thing. They're all my children, or she's my wife, and they're part of my family, and I need to love them well, but I need to love them as individuals. And the only way that I'll ever be able to do that is if I understand that they were created individually, to have individual meaning, to have individual value, and to have individual purpose for their lives and for our family's life and for my life as I interact with them one-on-one. It's just the reality of our lives, guys. We feel these things pull at our heartstrings so much. We see the way that they work out in so many different things. I mean, I think if you look at coronavirus right now, you see people in the hospital risking their lives to save the lives of other people, and that would not be possible if they did not think that the other person's life was worth saving. It would not be possible for us to raise money and donate blood and donate time and food and all these other things if we did not think that their lives were worth anything more or less than ours. We have to understand that their lives are worth something. But we're not going to universally do all these things, and we're not going to have the same things happen across all these different countries and the way people respond and the way people do all these things if lives are not objective. We can't figure it out that way. We're gonna do things differently. We're gonna treat people differently, but we find ourselves struggling with that when we don't do it well. We find ourselves struggling with us being mean to people or people being mean to us, and that's just the reality of the matter. When we think about people that we know of, we have to understand that their lives are worth something. And the best way that we can show them that their lives are worth something is to tell them that their life was so valuable that Jesus stood in their place, that Jesus took all of their sins so that we would not be separated from God, which means that he valued our life so highly that God wants to reconcile us back to him. That means that Jesus saw that there was purpose and direction and meaning and value and all these different things in our lives that were worth so much that he would come to this earth and stand in our place so that we could live with God. This is an incredible truth that a lot of people, when they don't think about the existence of God, miss out on. So when you think about people that have said these things to you, or when you speak to people that say that they don't believe in God, ask them what the world would look like if they ever considered that God never existed at all. Talk to them about their own meaning and value and purpose. Talk to them about how they view other people's meaning and value and purpose. So that's the end of this one. We're going to be back next week with part 2 of our Apologetics series. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to email us or contact us. You can go on our website, and under the contact tab, there is a space for you to fill out your name and then a little comment. Also, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as we will have more content coming out. Keep up with us on social media. We're going to have some Zoom chats going on in the next couple weeks as well. We miss you guys. I can't wait to be running around that field with you guys again, getting stung by all those bees in our volleyball pit or court or whatever it's called. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope you're not super bored or discouraged during this time. Remember, we're only going to get through this by being together, but by not being together. We love you guys. Can't wait to see you. See ya.